I'm going to take you on a journey across the country as Australia gets set to vote on an Indigenous voice to Parliament. For decades, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have sought formal recognition, but debate over the voice has become bitterly divided. But at the end of the day, it will be up to you, the Australian people, to decide. Why do you think it's taken so long to get to this point when we're finally going to have this referendum?
Yeah, because it's a blackfella issue. It's hard to get a blackfella issue on.
This is blackfella country, Central Australia. It's a long way from our national capital, a place where some of the loudest voices in the room belong to whitefellas.
So I think there's a rising level of anger about the fact that they can't be trusted with the detail.
I met 7 times with Peter Dutton, the leader of the opposition.
I think the Prime Minister's being tricky. I think he's dividing the country.
On no occasion did he put forward any proposed wording change. He made a decision that they were going to vote no.
Jacinta, tell us about growing up in Alice Springs.
Alice Springs was a great place to grow up in. There was a really wonderful community feel. Having an Aboriginal mother and a white Australian father wasn't unusual because there were many other kids in the same boat. It had a great sense of community. Everyone worked together. There was no division in terms of racial division because we were all one.
Alice Springs has become the latest poster child for all things that are not working in Australia's Indigenous communities. Do you think most Australians would have any idea about what life is like for people living in remote communities here in the Northern Territory or even in town camps here in Alice Springs?
Anyone who doesn't actually live in a community like Alice Springs or a remote community, anyone who lives in a capital city wouldn't have a clue. 2 of my uncles died because of alcohol. You know, an aunt was stabbed to death in alcohol-fueled violence. You know, in this town camp, my niece was stabbed and drowned in her own blood because her ex didn't want her to live in New South Wales to give them an opportunity at life, so he took her life. Or, you know, another town camp where I had to pick up my aunt's body and put her in the body bag because she just dropped dead. You know, I'm a tough person. But there's kids living in this, and this is normalised to them.
I was a child who grew up with a chronic alcoholic father and saw the ravages of what alcohol does to a family.
Another politician who calls the Alice home is the federal Labor MP, Marion Scrimgeour.
Our people don't live with alcohol, they die by it. And having worked in the health sector for 23 years, I've watched Aboriginal people being carted back out to their communities in a wooden box. And I've seen that too many times.
Do you think the voice can help address that issue?
I think it's time to put that control back in the hands of Aboriginal people, and that's what's important about the voice.
There's been a conga line of federal politicians who've descended on Alice Springs in recent times. All agree on one thing: the situation in some of the Indigenous communities here is shocking.
Jump and jump on it.
Finding a solution is another matter.
The story that I'd like to share with you about Alice Springs, and thank you for some of the reporting that you're doing there. I was out there talking about the $250 million investment into Alice Springs. And I said to the group, yeah, we have these pots of money, but you are the people that can tell us the best way to use it. And that was a surprise for them because I don't think it had happened before, where decisions are made here when they should be being made by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, which is why the voice is so important.
The problem is that the voice is not being heard. And in Alice Springs, when you listen to mothers and to those community members there, they want a restoration of law and order. They want kids to be able to go to school, and they want kids to be able to come home into a place which is not going to be conducive to violence.
It all comes down to closing the inequality gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. The government's key targets include life expectancy and health, education, housing, and adults in prison. And the results speak for themselves. As part of our journey into the debate over the voice, a number of the key Indigenous players wanted me to visit their country. That's why I'm headed to Stradbroke Island, just off the coast of Brisbane. Hey Dean, how are you, mate?
Yeah, mate, good to have you here. Welcome to Quandamooka country.
Great to be here.
Yeah.
Looks like paradise.
Mate, it is, I'm not going to lie. And we put on a beautiful day for you as well, so really looking forward to having a yarn.
Can't wait.
Good on you, mate, let's go.
Dean Parkin is a driving force behind the Yes campaign. So where are you taking us, Dean?
We're going out to Back Beach. So it's the beach that runs all the way down the eastern side of the island. It's about 30 kilometres, 40 kilometres long.
This is Dean's country. It's where his people are from, and it's called Quandamooka. That connection to country, how important is that for you?
It's everything. It's at the centre of who I am. And the minute you get on country, you just feel this energy through your feet. It feels like an old person, like a nana talking to you and saying, welcome home. Yeah, so it's centred to who I am as a person. Yeah, it reminds me on a daily basis what this whole campaign, what this whole cause for a voice is all about.
When you know about Aboriginal people, they are connected to Mother Earth. And Mother Earth and the people are one. Living here for thousands and thousands of years, where they had that time together, no interference from anything else, just the people and Mother Earth becoming one and looking after each other.
Evelyn Parkin is a traditional owner of Quandamooka. She's also Dean's mother. Tell us about Dean. What was Dean like growing up?
Oh, he was a really good little boy, you know. He was Mum's boy. And there was one time when he brought his his work that he did at school, and the teacher had these half-written sentences, and one of them that said, if I was Prime Minister, I would. And then she cut it off there, and then the children had to finish it off. My son here, at 8 years old, he said, I would grant land rights. Oh my goodness, I couldn't believe it.
You reckon he might be the Prime Minister one day?
Well, we always thought, but he tells us no. He would like to be behind the scenes. Yeah.
I got a story to tell you. It's a good one. It's about how these people, the first people, got a voice.
It's just a historic fact that Indigenous people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, my people, have been here for 65,000 years. So that recognition piece of indigeneity, a lot of people get, and in fact, a lot of people are quite proud of. We're not the only democracy. We're not the only country that's been colonised by European power. We're not the only country with beautiful landscapes and nice beaches and ideas of mateship. But we are home to the oldest continuous culture on Earth. Nobody else has that. Our story as Australians can connect to 65,000 years of story.
60,000 years they've been speaking.
Had 363 languages.
Dean is the campaign director for the Yes vote.
But no voice.
It's a subject close to his heart.
This could absolutely be a unifying moment for the country. I think it will be, but I think there'll be some tough times also getting to that point. And some people, unfortunately, will try and use this as an opportunity to divide us.
Is that story true?
It could be.
I think the country's in a different place now than where it has been previously. I don't think Australians out in communities look too kindly on attempts to divide us. And so while it will be tough, I think that ultimately that goodwill and people wanting to be part of something that brings the country together will shine through.
Also wanting to take us to their country was another leading figure in the Voice debate, but this one was from the No campaign. So tell us about where we're going today.
So we're going to Yuendamu, which is my family's community.
For Senator Jacinta Price, the remote community of Yuendamu is a special place. It's her traditional country, and it's where she still has family.
I've got a lot of wonderful, fond memories of Yuendamu.
But over the years, Yuendamu has changed. It's now another community on its knees.
You know, I feel like there's a lot of conflict going on. There's a lot of sadness in the place. It's the violence, it's the destruction, it's the dysfunction, it's the trauma of what goes on with personal and family violence, with sexual abuse and those sorts of things.
And that's why we are here, to see what difference the Voice will make for Yuendamu. Jacinta, we're here on your grandfather's country. How are you feeling?
Feeling disappointed, disrespected, and completely disregarded. All the disses, I guess.
We've travelled 300 kilometres from Alice Springs out here to Yuendamu after Senator Price invited us to speak with her grandmother. Surprisingly, when we arrived here, it was made clear to us that we weren't welcome. What should have happened here today?
Basically, I should have been able to come in and talk directly to my family members about their thoughts as Australian citizens and individuals in their own right about what they do know and what they don't know about the referendum, about what their concerns are in the community, without fear of backlash. They should have the freedom to have their voice heard, ultimately. This is what this whole bloody referendum's about. And their own voices are not being heard in this. And it's as simple as that, really. They should have had the freedom to be heard. My grandmother, who we're going to speak to today, I witnessed her being punched at a Land Council royalties meeting. I've witnessed her being threatened in this community. I'm sorry. And now she can't even talk. Now her voice is not being heard. I've shared her photo on social media of blood streaming down her face.
Do you think the controlling what people can say, trying to stop them from speaking, do you think that stops some of the issues in these communities being addressed?
Absolutely it does. This is what we're up against in Indigenous communities, is silencing, and individuals are simply not respected as individuals. We're seen as a collective, we're treated as such, and the powerful control us, even as the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians and a traditional owner.
there's two very different conversations. There's the Canberra bubble, politician, media-driven, inwardly focused, looking for the division and, you know, getting carried away in that. And then there's the conversation that's happening in community, and they're very, very different. And so that's why, for me, I'm very focused, and our campaign is very focused on that community-level conversation, because that's ultimately what this is about. Canberra's not going to decide the referendum. It's going to be Australians out in communities, and that's where we've got to focus.
There are very many ways to skin this cat.
On behalf of the Australian Labor Party, I commit to the Uluru Statement from the Heart.
This is a really, really radical and experimental way to do it.
We've reached the end of it, and we don't have bipartisanship.
The whole thing's built on a falsehood.
Do you know about the Voice to Parliament?
No.
The struggle for Indigenous rights and recognition has long been at the forefront of national debate. It's our history in the making, and critically, the first chapter was written more than 50 years ago.
A lot of Australians talk about, oh yes, we want to give the Aborigine a fair go, then it's full stop and it's usually forgotten. They never go on to say, let us vote in favour of any legislation which allows for the elevation of the Aboriginal people. They don't do these things. They talk about it, but they never do it.
We cannot help but wonder, why have it taken the white Australians just on 200 years to recognise us as a race of people?
And I feel that the time has come when Australia can no longer tolerate legal racial discrimination against its Indigenous people.
Solemnly hand to you these deeds as proof in Australian law that these lands belong to the Gurindji people.
It will be something to remind any government who will run in its power to change policies and constitutions that Aboriginal people will always be in front of their policy making and decision making, that we are people prior to this country. Please make it right.
The non-Aboriginal people of Australia will recognise the injustices of the past.
It begins, I think, with an act of recognition. Recognition that it was we who did the dispossessing. We took the traditional lands and smashed the traditional way of life. I think what we need to do is to open our hearts a bit, all of us.
How dare you? You told my people that your system was best. We have come to accept that. We have come to believe that. And now you say that you were wrong, and we were wrong to believe you. How dare you? How dare you?
I announce that if I'm re-elected, I will put to the Australian people a referendum to formally recognise Indigenous Australians in our Constitution.
The time has now come for the nation to turn a new page. A new page in Australia's history by righting the wrongs of the past for the pain, suffering and hurt of these stolen generations, their descendants and for their families left behind. We say sorry.
The Honourable the Prime Minister.
By embracing the targets of closing the gap, this government deliberately leaves itself nowhere to hide.
We are working today to right a great wrong
a mistake when our Constitution was framed over a century ago.
Which brings us to 2017. The Uluru Statement from the Heart, the birthplace of what is today the Indigenous Voice to Parliament.
What we're doing now at this referendum on the voice, this referendum on recognition, is part of that continuum. It's not anything new. It hasn't been developed by the government or the Prime Minister. It's part of a very long-running story.
That story was given a new chapter from a new Prime Minister in 2022.
On behalf of the Australian Labor Party, I commit to the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full.
One of the first things that you mentioned on election night last year was your commitment to the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Why is this so important to you?
Because it is one of those things that is nation building. It's extraordinary that we are the only advanced nation that grew out of a colony that hasn't recognised our First Peoples. And so recognition in the Constitution is very important. It's something that Indigenous Australians have asked for. It's a gracious and generous request in my view, and it is time that we did this.
The Uluru Statement from the Heart was now firmly on the political agenda.
People want to make sure the truth is never forgotten.
One of its key architects and a leading figure in the Yes campaign is Noel Pearson.
So this has been a long process, a very accommodating compromises made by Indigenous leaders, and I've been at the heart of that process, so I know what's happened. And we've reached the end of it, and we don't have bipartisanship.
So what do you think the 2023 referendum is about?
Well, to me, it's about putting race back into the Constitution. And the whole thing's built on a falsehood.
Warren Mundine is another senior Indigenous leader. He's in the Vote No camp.
The falsehood is that Aboriginals don't have a voice. And when you actually look at it, since 1973 from the Whitlam government, they've always had a national body. In fact, we've got a national body at the moment called the Coalition of the Peaks, and they sit at the National Cabinet and they advise the Minister for Indigenous Australians about what should be done and how things should be operating. So that's that voice now.
This is one proposed model of the voice. There would be 2 members from each state and territory, as well as the Torres Strait Islands. There would also be 6 additional members for remote representation. It's also proposed that there will be up to 35 regions representing their local community groups, of which there are hundreds. As far as we know, it's the only model the government is looking at, and there's no guarantee this is how the voice would look. One of the things that we picked up travelling around the country is that people don't seem to have a clear understanding of what the voice is. What is the voice?
It's an advisory group to the government on matters that affect Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It's not binding. It's not going to be a funding body. It will give advice in order to close the gap on health, on education, on housing, on incarceration rates, on all the areas where there's this chasm between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australia. It's as simple as that.
I don't believe a body of 24 elites with a Canberra-based voice is going to make a difference for Indigenous people in regional and remote areas. And so in the Constitution, I think that is a very significant undertaking. I think it's problematic, as many lawyers have pointed out, and that's the basis of our concern.
There's one thing all agree with. Recognition of Indigenous Australians is long overdue.
The polling shows massive support for recognition. You know, over 90% of Australians support that. The voice was the issue, so there's a whole lot of questions about it.
The political divide over the voice comes down to this. The Yes campaign want it enshrined in our constitution. The No camp believe what's proposed goes too far.
We've proposed, as Carmel Langton recommended, that there should be a legislated arrangement or a local and regional voice was their recommendation. We suggest it should be legislated. I believe very strongly that if you create a new chapter within the Constitution, the High Court will take that seriously. That is that if somebody's been given a voice, they should be given ample resources to contemplate what it is they want to say. That means on technical matters, taxation matters, defence matters, they will need a level of technical expertise to advise them. And I think it grinds the process of government down to a near halt.
For the voice to be enshrined in the Constitution, it will need to be passed at a referendum. That means it will require the support of a majority of Australians and a majority of states. History would suggest achieving that without bipartisan support will be almost impossible. Australians have voted at 44 referendums, just 8 have been successful, and none without the support of both major parties.
I think there's been a lot of people working on this for many years with the very best of intentions. And they've conceptualised this idea of Indigenous people being heard as a right in the Constitution, and so that I understand.
Louise Clegg is a barrister who specialises in constitutional law.
There have been so many people who are so well-intentioned in this. I mean, everyone is, and we all want reconciliation and Indigenous recognition in the Constitution. But there are very many ways to skin this cat, and this is a really, really radical and experimental way to do it.
This is what we'll be asked to vote on. Just 3 short paragraphs make up the proposed voice to Parliament. For Louise, the devil is in the detail.
When I first saw the text and I looked at it and immediately realised that the wording there, when it uses the words matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, that was code for an entrenched political right in the Constitution on everything. Because that idea that there's an entrenched political right for a small group of people means that there's an entrenched political right to have an additional say on everything, not just on matters that relate to Indigenous people.
Does it frustrate you now that there's such a strident opposition from Conservatives to what you've now proposed?
Absolutely. Now, we simplified the wording to make it absolutely clear this was not a structure of the Parliament. This was a structure outside of the Parliament, providing advice to the Parliament. And the drafting we have today, you could not get a more safe and a more thoroughly examined proposition than the one that the Albanese government has adopted.
So you believe that with the wording at the moment, that the voice would have the power to advise the government not just on matters relating to Aboriginal people, but on any issue relating to any government policy?
Well, that's not my belief. I mean, that's a fact. And we already know from the proponents, they say openly that they need a voice that goes beyond Indigenous affairs and extends to things like, and these are their words, not mine, climate change, resource extraction, taxation, welfare, tourism, and the list goes on.
But for the people who know Outback Australia the best, the voice is very simple.
There'll be no bureaucracy. What we want to set up is the people of Yuendumu on one side of the table, with the government, with the local council, with the Commonwealth government, sit down and say, what do we need to do here in Yuendumu? The voice at the end of the day is a table, is a partnership table where we conduct negotiations with the government. And let's make a real deal. Okay, the government provides the resources, the community commits to the things that it will do. It can't just be the government doing everything. You know, it'll never work. We'll have no success.
For his part, Warren Mundine believes there are plenty of seats at the table already.
You know, I go to Canberra or the Darwin or any of the Parliament, and I'm tripping over Aboriginals. I'm tripping over, advisors, land council people, health services. All these organisations are there now. My concern is we're going to be spending $380 million, and I know that because that's a budgetary paper, on a referendum. Why are we spending that amount of money when we could be doing that better, spending that money better?
With debate over the voice continuing to grow louder, there are some parts of Australia where it barely rates a mention.
It's a beautiful country. It is. It is.
Groote Island in the Gulf of Carpentaria is one such place. It's home to the Anandeliaqua people. It's also one of the most successful Indigenous communities in Australia. So how many youth are in custody from here on Groote Island at the moment?
No one at the moment.
None?
No youth in detention at the moment, no, which is good.
Matthew McKenzie is a local elder. He says the key to a stable and well-run community is self-empowerment. Now you're really starting to take control of your own affairs.
It's actually important to Anandeliaqua people. We should be running the things, stuff like this, get ownership of education, the justice, whatever. We don't have to go depend on government and whoever, We actually the owner here.
Life here on Groote Island seems a million miles away from Canberra, so you can understand why the voice might not be their #1 priority.
You couldn't get anything different from Central Australia to Groote Island. The Anandeliaqua Land Council and its elected members have had a vision, and that vision is now being realised. And that's an important thing, and that's what we should be getting behind.
Constantine Mamarika is a traditional owner. How often do you get out here, Constantine?
Every dry seasons.
He's invited me to see his special place.
It's my life, I love this place. I grew up here.
What speaks loudest to the locals here is their history. It's writ large and tells of a time when there was no need for a voice. Constantine, why do you want to share this place with us?
Because I need the world to know what I've got in my land and what the stories I got. Because all these paintings has got the stories.
Life here is all about the basics, including wrangling a 4.5 metre croc.
Right, pull that up. Give us the hands. Let's big fella.
While the local land council's position is in support of the voice, many of the people we spoke to had little understanding of it. Do you know about the voice to Parliament?
No.
Ida Mamarika is the island's senior educator. So there's going to be a referendum later this year about having a voice, they're calling it a voice to Parliament, an advisory body for Aboriginal people that advises the government on policy matters.
I didn't know anything about it. Now you're telling me.
So does it sound like a good idea?
It is a good idea.
I'd say the largest number of Aboriginal people are don't know that there is a voice. You know, you just go out in the bush and ask people. And the second group is people who do know, but they don't know what it is.
Well, we've seen that on the ground. That's been our experience over the past 2 weeks, I think, is that people... I mean, there's a broad amount of, I think, support for the idea.
Yeah.
But they don't know what it is.
Well, that's why I say, why don't you do it now? Why don't you legislate it now? And then people can see what it looks like, how it works, and then later on look at maybe looking at a constitutional change rather than, you know, don't look behind the curtain, just trust us type thing. And politicians, I wouldn't trust as far as I can throw them.
Do you know about the Indigenous Voice to Parliament?
No, not really.
I can only see despair.
Do you think it's been explained well enough?
No.
No.
I cannot see any good flowing from a no vote.
But I think it's a really good step forward for our country.
What if it fails?
Well, I'm focused on it being successful.
From Aranda country in Central Australia to Quandamooka land here on Stradbroke Island, we've sought your voice. It's clear there's plenty of support. There's also no shortage of scepticism and downright opposition. But all that matters will be how you vote. It's up to you, the Australian people, to decide. Do you know about the Voice to Parliament? Do you support the plan for an Indigenous Voice to Parliament?
Yeah, I do. I don't know enough about it to make an educated opinion.
The Indigenous Voice to Parliament will live or die from the votes cast in urban Australia. So we've conducted a straw poll. First in Melbourne. Do you know about the Indigenous Voice to Parliament?
No, not really.
I think it's great. I think that there could be improvement to it, obviously, but I think it's a really good step forward for our country.
I've heard very brief things through my friends, but no, nothing that I've really read up in.
I'm just wondering whether you are planning to support the vote for an Indigenous Voice to Parliament.
Yes, absolutely.
And further north in Sydney.
I don't really know too much about it, so I haven't come to a conclusion which way I'm going to go yet, so...
I don't know. Do you think it's been explained well enough? No.
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 No. That's my problem.
Is it not reasonable to ask for more detail, given this is going to be one of the most significant changes to our constitution in our nation's history?
Yeah, no, I think it's reasonable to ask. We've got to interrogate this. We have to interrogate the voice. But we also got to listen to the solutions. You know, we've got to give space to the solutions, and there's got to be a willingness to understand that the piece we're talking about is just the few words at the top of the pyramid here, which is the Constitution. That's what recognition is about. It's about the few words at the top of the pyramid.
Our Indigenous people make up just under 4% of Australia's population. The challenge for the Yes campaign is to get a majority of the country to climb on board for the referendum to succeed.
The reason why Indigenous people have said through the Uluru Statement, we want a referendum on a voice, is because we have put our faith and belief in the people of Australia to get this right. And it also then comes upon those who are advocating the particular cases, our side, the Yes case, and those in the No case, have a responsibility to try and make this something that informs people, that looks to unite rather than seek division.
I heard Dean Parkin in a recent interview state that the gap exists between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australia. That's nonsense. The gap exists between the marginalised and those who aren't. And Dean Parkin's not marginalised, but he's Indigenous. But the proponents of the Voice are suggesting that as a race of Australians, we're inherently disadvantaged. I'm not disadvantaged, Dean's not disadvantaged, Noel Pearson's certainly not disadvantaged, he lives in Noosa. But the truth of the situation is the gap exists, like I said, between the marginalised and those who aren't.
They may be on opposite sides of the Voice debate, but both Jacinta Price and Dean Parkin are immensely proud of their Indigenous heritage.
Genuinely, the spirit of our ancestors are here on this country, so I feel connected to my past. I feel connected very much so to what's going on here with my extended family around, and it's something I feel very privileged to be in that situation.
Tell us about your decision to go into politics.
I understood that there was a need in Canberra of understanding of traditional culture. And because, again, like I said, I wanted to save lives. I want to stop burying my loved ones. I've had a gutful of it. I'm over it. And in order to create change, you've got to be part of it. And that's why I've put myself on the line to bring about that change, because I'm determined.
Even in this debate, there's so many groups who are going to have to vote on this. There's all sorts of multicultural groups. There's people from all different places. I mean, you're talking to some of those people. What are they telling you?
They're like the rest of us. They're very confused about what it is and why it's needed.
Warren Mundine's campaign against the referendum has become very personal.
It's a nice little gesture.
His push for a no vote has made him a target for online abuse. It's serious, and it's starting to take a toll. How divisive has this debate now become?
Oh, I found you have to look at my Twitter. Mate, I've been called everything under the sun, and 90% of them I don't even know. I had to look it up in the dictionary. But it has been very divisive. It's been very divisive in the Aboriginal community. Now, maybe I'm overplaying this, but it does, because of all the abuse and everything that I get, I'm concerned that those threats and those words can turn into actions.
So you're genuinely concerned for your personal safety?
Oh, I'm not too genuinely concerned about mine. I'm a big, ugly bloke who used to play rugby league.
You laugh it off, but it must have some effect.
Well, it did. I tried to commit suicide twice. So it does have effect on you. What I'm trying to do now is just, I'm in therapy, I do that, but I also, I do laugh it off because it's a way of coping with it. Yeah.
And this is in recent times?
A couple of weeks ago.
Are you worried that you could go down the same path again, given you're putting yourself right in the front of the No campaign, and this is becoming a very heated and divisive?
Well, it is becoming heated and divisive.
Well, it shouldn't be. It should be a unifying moment for the nation. I have reached out, tried to get as much political consensus as possible around this. Of course, we had, in the lead up to the 2019 election, there was a view that this would be advanced during the last term of the government. That didn't happen. There wasn't real progress, but this has been around for a long period of time now.
The view of the Prime Minister is that this thing will just get through on the vibe, and the Prime Minister doesn't need to explain it. I think it's a fatal error of judgment. I think the Prime Minister, if he's after his moment in history, that's fine, if that's his motivation, but it's not going to serve Indigenous communities or the broader public any purpose. It's going to undermine our democracy. It creates a new chapter in the Constitution. The Constitution's our nation's rule book. I think the deliberate strategy of the Prime Minister to keep the information from the Australian public is damaging. It's damaging to the national debate. And I think ultimately, if he's successful in getting it through on the vibe, it'll be damaging to our country.
For the Indigenous Voice to Parliament to get up, more than 50% of voters in at least 4 states must tick yes. And remember, no referendum in Australia's history has succeeded without bipartisan support. What does success look like to you in a referendum? Is it just getting 51% and 4 out of the 6 states? Do you see that as success?
I think once it occurs, you will see a coming together as well if Australians do vote to change our constitution. You'll see it coming together, just like on the apology to stolen generations. Now, that was an issue that some argued was divisive, some argued shouldn't occur, and that there were all sorts of consequences which, of course, didn't arise. I don't know anyone now who walks around and says that was a bad thing for the nation.
But what if the result is close, if it's close either way? Is that not going to create an outcome that's actually going to divide Australians rather than bring them together?
No, I think Australians will, with a successful outcome, will come together. And it will be a moment of respect for Indigenous Australians. It will also be a moment where non-Indigenous Australians can, in my view, feel better about ourselves.
What if it fails?
Well, I'm focused on it being successful.
What do you think it'll mean for the country if this referendum fails?
Well, I think it will set back reconciliation. And frankly, I think it's why the Prime Minister should delay the vote if he forms a judgment that this is not going to succeed. The Prime Minister is dividing our country. At the very best, maybe this gets up at 51 to 49. And I think that is a perilous position to put our country in. And the Prime Minister, I think rightly, will be accused of having divided the nation when there's no need to.
Back up in Quandamooka country, I was curious to know what Dean Parkin's mum made of this political divide. The voice debate's become quite divided at some levels. Do you think it's something, though, that could bring the nation together?
It will bring the nation together if all the Australians vote for it, absolutely. And once those people in Parliament start listening and acting on it, there will be healing. That's the most important thing, is healing. And so when this is all sorted out through Parliament, Mother Earth and the people will start to heal. And that's one of the biggest things for me, to see that happening.
You're the most prominent face of the No campaign. You've staked a lot on this referendum. What will it mean for you if the referendum succeeds?
If the referendum succeeds, given that we're being told that it's Parliament that will decide on what it looks like, I'll be doing everything in my power to make sure that we don't have an entity that has ultimate power to run roughshod over Parliament and over our democracy. This referendum has probably been our nation's most divisive referendum. And either way, whether it's successful or it's not, there's going to have to be a lot of work done to fix those fractures that have taken place as a result of this referendum.
As our ancient continent enters uncharted waters, much is at stake here. Potential changes to the Australian Constitution are chief among them. Political careers are another. You've made it pretty clear that the magnitude of this decision that Australians are going to have to vote on later this year. But have you now staked your political career on the outcome of this referendum?
Well, I don't know what the Prime Minister's answer would be to the same question, but ultimately we make decisions that we believe are in our country's best interests. That's why I've taken the position that I have. It's strongly backed by 95% of the party room. There's a very strong feeling within our party room that you just can't accept a proposal to get something into the Constitution based on the vibe. And I think there's overwhelming support for the position that we've adopted.
Overwhelmingly, this is something that Indigenous Australians do want to happen. All of the surveys show that over 80% of First Nations people support this constitutional change and the form in which it's being put forward.
But if they don't, is there a plan B?
Well, I'm being optimistic going forward. I think that it will be, obviously, it will be disappointing if that doesn't occur, but we know that constitutional change is hard in this country.
Come referendum day, Noel Pearson would ask us to think of Yunupingu, the Indigenous activist and land rights campaigner.
With Yunupingu, whose people are descendants of, the science tells us, they're the descendants of the first humans who crossed the Torres Strait land bridge. And it's a recognition of this extraordinary history, that Australia was first occupied by human beings 60 millennia ago. If we win this referendum, then the majority who vote for it will have made that history part of the Australian story, because that's what a yes vote will ultimately achieve.
And what if you lose?
Well, then I think I can only see despair. I cannot see any good flowing from a no vote.
I've spent more than a decade reporting on Indigenous affairs. I've seen the best of Aboriginal Australia, but I've also seen and reported on things that would shock most people in this country. The gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people is stark, and it's getting wider. It's clear government policies to address this issue have failed miserably. So can the voice make any difference? For me, that's the question Australians will need to answer.